I had the pleasure of speaking with Freddie Smith, a real estate agent and associate broker, as well as a Daytime Emmy Award winner for the show Days of Our Lives. Freddie Smith is also a creator on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, where he breaks down the financial challenges Americans face, specifically within the generational divide. In this discussion, Freddie shares his expertise on America's affordable housing crisis, the state of the American dream, as well as the tension and repercussions of this generational divide. I hope this video is able to provide some value to you, and thank you all so much for your support. Why do you believe the American dream has become so unaffordable for most Americans?
I think the number one issue we're having is housing. I think a staple of the American dream, I think some people have different definitions, but I think we can all agree that being able to work a 40-hour-a-week job, if you're lucky, just one person in the family, but maybe these days, two people working 40 hours a week, but being able to comfortably afford the average home was always a thing from 1970 to 2021. You could work pretty much any job. As long as you showed up, worked 40 hours, you could afford a home, raise a family, get a fixer-upper in a nice area. You know, it's got some sidewalks and street lights. You're 5 minutes to a school. As a middle-class American dream family, you might have like a vehicle or two that are 7, 8 years old. You can go on a 2-week vacation. If you want to get a pool or you want to do something extra, you work a little overtime. That was the American dream that our parents saw, that we saw as millennials growing up, that we wanted to have. We wanted to make $70K a year. We wanted to make $100K a year. But now the American dream has gotten so far out of touch because being able to buy the average home now, you have to make well over six figures, which cuts out such a large percentage of people under 40. And now we're forced to rent, spending way more money on rent than anyone's ever spent. So all of that money is now being taken away from other adventures that we would do, savings, investments. So the biggest pressure, the biggest problem that we have, in my opinion, there's a few, but at the top of the list is housing. It's really crippled the American dream for most people under 40.
I agree, and it's something that I'm very much concerned about as well. And I feel like there's a certain segment of people that talk about it, but then when you see a Zillow report that says homes have increased by 80% since 2020, and the median income has only increased by 23%, that is incredibly alarming and something I'm not sure why it's not scouring every headline. What do you believe are certain factors that have caused owning a home to be so out of reach for most Americans?
It's a combination of a few things. I would say the biggest problem is that we're short about 5 to 7 million homes in the country. In 2008, when the crash happened and all the supply flooded the market, the last thing you would want to do as an investor is build a bunch of homes when we have too much supply and the housing market was a disaster. But once it corrected, 2010, 2012, 2014, we started having low supply. So we kind of saw this coming for 10 years. Around that same time, private equity started coming into the market, buying up the available homes, lessening the shortage, making the shortage worse. And then when COVID hit, people thought it would be a good idea, which I think in theory, their heart was in the right place. People are struggling. The economy's shut down. What do we do? Why don't we lower interest rates to 2.5% so people can refinance, save $500 a month, and really help them? But by lowering the interest rates to 2.5%, everybody came out in droves in 2020, 2021, bought up all the supply we had left, and it just skyrocketed the prices. But now we're still 7 million homes short. That was never addressed. So now it's just the supply and demand. It's going to cost $400,000 or $500,000 in most places now. And even though income did go up, it's nowhere near enough money. Not even close. You know, they say 80,000 is roughly the median household income. You need at least 160. And I know that sounds crazy, but when you really run the numbers, yes, you can qualify with 120, but you're going to be living paycheck to paycheck to own that house, and that's not wise. So we're that far. That's how big that gap is. And this is new as of 2020.
It seems a little controversial to say that private equity is buying up so much homes. I feel like that is definitely the case, but when I go online and I try to find research supporting that, it seems that it's very muddy waters. Are you seeing a lot of private equity actually buying real estate?
It is. The joke I always make is that there's no, agents or investors walking around with polos that say I'm with BlackRock. It's you've kind of like I've worked with investors before. My wife and I, where we had even a listing one time, and they were like, "Yeah, we're investors," and they ended up sending us their proof of funds. their proof of funds had over $100 million in the account that they showed us. And we're like, so this isn't just a mom and pop landlord. These are, but they're under these different names. So I think there's just a bunch of different segments. They're not coming out saying, look, we're BlackRock buying these. So it's just under a bunch of different companies so that it's really hard to figure out who's buying what. But with that kind of money, and even in Orlando, I don't know if this happened in Austin, but you'll drive by new allotments, all cookie cutter homes, and it just says homes for rent, all 150 of them. And so that's 150 homes taken off the market, which could lower prices, but now they're just renting. And so it's a combination of all of that. But I've done my research too. I've seen a few articles where there's actually like acquisitions where you'll see someone bought 30,000 homes or they bought this company that comes with 30,000. But you'd have to look into every single company of what they're buying. So it's not like, here's how much they've bought. So it's a little hard to find, but that's kind of what's happening behind the scenes.
What I was seeing too is that it seemed like private equity has these layers of different LLCs and different corporations. So it makes it incredibly hard to actually go to the source of who is really buying this. Something that is also affecting the creation of new homes is I think these very restrictive zoning laws. We've heard the politicians talk about creating affordable housing for about a decade now. Why are they not actually doing more to be able to make to kind of destruct and rebuild some of these restrictive zoning laws that are really making it difficult to create anything?
I think one of the biggest reasons, and I don't fault people for this because I understand where they're coming from, but they're trying to keep the value of their properties where it's at or going up. Because again, it sounds great if you're like, yeah, I would vote for affordable housing, just not in my neighborhood because I don't want my equity go down, my net worth to go down. People might be refinancing or be underwater a little bit. They can't risk allowing the zoning to change or vote for it because they don't want their neighborhood. Even the same thing with apartments. At least in Florida, it's the Wild West out here. They will build like a school with a gas station, and then like they have like they're doing pretty good here. But I would say that's the number one issue. I think it boils down to money, number one. But they wrap it in zoning. But I think a lot of people are choosing not to get behind it because you can't piss off a bunch of homeowners that's been in an area for 20 years and potentially kill their equity. So it's tough because what do? It's not fair that they've worked and paid this house off. They want it to keep going up, but the more it keeps going up, the more their children and grandchildren aren't able to live the American dream. So that's kind of where the tension is of like, where do we bridge the gap where maybe this side gives a little so that this side can get a little, but they're pretty much holding strong in every aspect, which I understand. But that's why I think the conversation needs to continue to be had.
I agree. And I think something that we struggle with too is that the majority of individuals making decisions own their own homes. So it's incentivizing themselves to have this happen. I think that if we just had the conversation more, like you mentioned, we could find other innovative ways to be able to not just throw some kind of garbage next to your nice house just to have affordable housing. That I think that there's other solutions we could do that we don't even think about because we're going between these two extremes.
No, you're right. I think the overarching, I think all of us, and I think the younger generation, because we're feeling the pain a little bit more, and we're also open to ideas because that's how we've grown up as millennials with constant change. We just need a whole new way of looking at everything. The world has truly changed, not only because of technology, but because of the pandemic. And so affordable housing needs to also be looked at differently. Like, why can't you have these cookie cutter neighborhoods like I live in? I bought a new build. It's like we all look the same with different colored doors. But why are they 1,600 square feet? Why aren't they just 900, but still super nice and allow people to just get their foot in the door? Like what's the problem with doing things? But we need to think differently because all the old ways, that's why we want younger people in charge. I just think everything we grew up with has now changed, and we're going to go through that growing period, not only for housing, but everything else. We need to think differently because whatever we used to do, unfortunately, will never work for the younger generation. So we need fundamental change from top to bottom.
I absolutely agree. Something that is, I believe a lot of people are believing is that the Federal Reserve is projected now to begin to lower rates to close off the year. People believe that as rates go down, it's going to be more affordable and easier to purchase a home. I think all that is going to do is just increase demand, actually making it more difficult for most people to afford a home. Am I correct on that suspicion, or what do you believe is going to happen if rates begin to decrease?
I mean, we've already seen it. I've kind of run numbers multiple times to kind of give people an idea of, hey, this is what it's going to cost. We're at 6.2% today. If we see a 5.5, it's going to open the door for so many more Americans. Because back when it was 8%, you needed about 120. Now, if it goes down to 5.5, you might need only 85 or 90,000 to qualify. So think about how many more people can do that, and it will increase the demand. So that's what we have to kind of wait and see. So I'm even telling first-time home buyers, I'm like, if you are comfortable and you're looking to buy, you want to be one of the first ones in this next wave, because if we have another wave where it increases, say even 10, 20%, it's going to officially lock out everybody if it never comes down. If we never see any sort of crash, because it's already locked out most, but if you start getting where the average house is 500, like if the whole world starts being Austin, like you probably can't get a house in most places for under 500 there, correct?
No way. No. Even a 500,000 is a garbage home. Yeah, you got to tear it down.
Yeah. So we're seeing that. And like I said, living in Los Angeles, like I see how a 900 square foot home is 800,000. So I can see that happening all across America. So that we need supply more than anything, but you're correct in that. I think the lower interest rates are going to increase the demand. The only variable, there's two variables. One, if rates get low enough, what will that mean for all the people who own a house that have a 3% interest rate? If they see a 5%, that might be enough for them to put their house for sale and go, I'll pay a little extra to upgrade. But when they had a 3% and it was 7 to 8, it would be really financially irresponsible to give that up. Even if you want to upgrade, you don't want to move across the street and spend $1,200 more a month. And then the other thing is who overextended themselves 2022, 2023, and 2024. That's the big variable that I'm keeping close attention to, because I'm seeing a lot of people say, oh, I bought my house, but I'm feeling a little house poor. I'm living paycheck to paycheck because this house is so expensive. If we have a downturn and people start losing their jobs, that cohort could be a potential, not a big crash, but it could affect it. But I really don't think it's going to happen. If I had to guess, which is stupid because none of us really know, but I just think prices are going to continue to just go up and to the right, but just kind of slowly. We might have a spike on the initial drop, but I think it's just going to gradually continue to go up.
If you were just going to do a projection for the next 5 years, do you think it, or maybe even the next 10 years, do you think that we're going to begin to make a pivot, create more homes, things are going to begin to get situated, or do you think that the future is looking a bit bleak?
I mean, I'm a hopeful, optimistic person, though sometimes I make videos that don't seem that way, but I'm trying to be honest, and encourage people to go, hey, if this is the truth, like I'm the type of person that I wish I would have known. If someone would have made a video and I would have seen it in 2018, I would have said, let me drop everything and buy a house. I just didn't know. At the current moment of filming this, it doesn't seem that hopeful, to be honest. I don't see the market crashing by 30-40%, making it affordable again. I just think this is going to be the new norm. If they do build more houses, that could help. But I think the idea of talking about the average home in America is probably going to start changing, because I think every little city is going to have its own real estate market. There's still some markets today that are getting multiple offers. And even my buddy just bought in Ohio, and he was, I laugh because he's my best friend and it was such a struggle and we pick on each other, but he had made so many offers and couldn't get a house accepted, finally did. But that's not really happening so much in Florida, in my area. It's you can really kind of go in, make a good offer, and things are kind of calm. So I think we're going to start seeing it change all across the country. And my only other prediction for the younger people, it's just as uncomfortable, especially someone like in your situation, to have all your friends and family and everything you know in this area. It's hard for people to want to move, but there are places in America that you can get a house for 250, 300,000. So I think there'll be like a new Orlando or a new Austin popping up, where younger people are going to find a cool hip place to move to, where you can get something for 275 or 300, and then that'll start to grow. But people are going to have to start migrating amongst America if home ownership is important to them.
And that's something that I really appreciate about your channel as a whole, is that you use concrete data to support what it is that you're stating, and you're very direct about it. You're not painting around what it is that's going on. I try to do the same. I put a lot of emphasis on the data. I try to provide historical trends of what has brought us to this point. I believe that we live in an environment of extremes, and it's very difficult to find any sort of reason anywhere. But what I am seeing, and I suspect that you are as well, is that there is a certain portion of older individuals that are looking way past the data, way past the reason, and they just seem to continue to berate the younger generations. Why do you believe this divide has gotten so extreme, and why do you believe it frankly seems very toxic? I can't really understand why this has gotten to the point to where it is.
I think it's, first of all, I think it's friendly. I try my best to when I talk crap on the boomers, where I go, look, I'm talking crap because you guys started it, and I got to put the record straight. But I love the boomers. My parents are boomers. A lot of people in our lives are boomers. I think they're just slightly offended because regardless of their lives being much easier economically, they all had very difficult, challenging lives. And when we say, oh, it was so easy for you, I think they're just offended because they're like, what, you think my 60 hours a week was nothing, you little punk on your cell phone with your latte? So I think it's more of that, but they're ignoring the data. And that's all we're looking for. I tell the boomers all the time, I go, we can't build a time machine to go make your life difficult in the 80s, nor would we want to. But you can't ignore the fact that it is more difficult today. And all we're looking for is a little compassion, a little empathy, a little like, hey, it was hard for me. It's definitely harder for you. Is there anything we can do to help? What can we do to work together? But that's not really the boomers' energy. They're very much like in their ways, which is fine. But I think that's where it started, and it's when they say things like, if you cancel Netflix and stop drinking Starbucks, you'll be able to buy a house. I understand what they mean. They mean don't overspend. You got to be responsible because they had to be responsible. But the thing that they don't understand, which is why I've made 100 videos on this, is that the only hurdle the boomers had in the 80s was saving for a down payment. Once the down payment was saved, which was like 10 grand, which was 20% down, they qualified for the loan. The average income qualified for the average house. So their only hurdle was saving that down payment. Today, you can stop drinking Starbucks. You can cancel Netflix. You cannot go on dates. You cannot go to brunch. You cannot do avocado toast for 15 years to finally save the down payment. But if you don't make 120 to 150, you can't buy the house anyway. So by saying things like stop Starbucks, I understand where they're coming from, but it's just not correct. It just doesn't help. You can't save your way into a house these days. You have to earn your way into a house. You have to make more income.
Something that I believe is happening too is, again, coming from a finance background, the majority of people that I spent my 5 years at the bank was speaking with older individuals. So I got to hear a lot of it was wisdom, but I also saw what was going on in their bank accounts. And so something that I believe is happening is this mentality of kicking the can down the road for younger generations to eventually deal with it because they will be dead by that point, is kind of that common saying that they have. I believe that they are experiencing that can beginning to stop. A lot of older generations do not have as much money, I believe, as we think that they do. I saw a lot of them running up a lot of debt, a lot of home equity lines of credit on their homes, a lot of things that was very concerning to me. So this is going to be a two-part question, but for the first part, what do you believe as a whole this country's ability is? Do you believe this country has the ability to turn around the national debt that we have? I believe we're going to be in debt forever. I feel very negative on this portion, but I'm curious to see what you're experiencing and your thoughts on the national debt.
Yeah, this one surprised me because I kind of learned the hard way about the national debt. Again, I want to be optimistic here, but even the projections that are being made, we're going to continue to go up. We're at 35 trillion. I think in 10 years we'll be more around 50 or 55, and we just don't have our budget's terrible. We spend, I think, about $3 trillion between Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and welfare programs, which are necessary. We spend almost $1 trillion on defense, and we spend $1 trillion on the $35 trillion of debt just on interest payments. So we bring in $5 trillion for those things. So if you want other programs or we're going to need other money, we're continuing to add to that deficit. So you can't cut Social Security. You can't cut welfare programs. You can't cut healthcare for people. No one wants to do that. But we're also spending all of our tax dollars. So they're like, well, we need to generate more tax revenue. Sure, but you guys are going to spend it. They're going to spend it. So eventually, we're going to have to deal with it. Again, the housing market. There were indicators in 2010 that there was going to be a housing crisis because we were low in supply. But the government, instead of putting some money and creating something in 2010, 2012 to prevent the disaster, decided let's let the disaster happen and then we'll throw an ungodly amount of money on it. And they're doing the same thing with Social Security. That's going to run out in 2033 instead of doing something before. So whoever's president in 2033 or whoever's going to be running in 2032 is going to have that on their campaign trail of what they're going to do when they don't have enough money. So they're going to have to borrow more and the debt's going to go up. So it's just like this perpetual, circle. But eventually, like you said, I mean, what, do we get to 100 trillion? Like, is that even, that can't even be real. What do we do? I don't know. How would you ever pay that off if we are bringing in 5 trillion and spending 6.5? That's a big gap to cover.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm concerned about as well, because a lot of the discussions I have is I'm addressing the issue, bringing historical trends, economic data to support it, but I don't have the solution. And I feel like maybe just as a society now, if you don't have the solution, we're going to ignore it. We're just going to bury our heads in the sand because there isn't the next right thing. And I think a large concern, especially with the older generations, is the increasing cost of healthcare. So I have to take blood thinners for the rest of my life now because I had blood clots in my lungs and I have this genetic disorder that increases my likelihood of having blood clots. The medicine that I take is Eliquis, made here in the United States. It is $80 in Canada, under $80 in Mexico. The exact same thing, Eliquis there. For here, without insurance, $700. If I was on Obamacare, it's going to be around over 90 or something like that. Thankfully, I'm still on my parents' insurance, but in a year I'll fall off because I'll be 26. But when because I was consistently having to go to the doctor's office, I was seeing a lot. It's just flooded with older individuals, and you know that their retirement is getting flooded towards that. But it's like we can't talk about it, and that's something that I'm really concerned as a society, is that we see the issues, but we're choosing to just kind of avoid it.
They're just pushing it off to when the disaster happens and let whoever then let them deal with it. But I think because we have the ability to communicate for the first time in history to the masses, all of us young people are like, wait a minute, like the national debt's going to be a problem in 30 years. But I think it's the same thing if you see someone who's budgeting poorly, if they're making $50,000 a year, but they're spending 65, you would say, hey, you got to stop that or make more money. And we could come up with a solution and turn that around in 6 months to 2 years. The government, when you think about 35 trillion, it seems like that's going to take a lifetime. Like if we were going to create a solution, it would probably take until we're in our 50s or 60s for it to even start working in the right direction. And so I think that's why it's just out of sight, out of mind, like you said, and they're just pushing it down the road. And then to piggyback on the health, thing, there's some, if you see my desk, I have video ideas that I write down all the time. And there's this new segment I've been studying for the past 3 months, and I think I'm going to start getting into it, is the food industry, the pharmaceutical companies, and our healthcare system is kind of a disaster. Even like what you said, of having these pills be that much money is completely unnecessary. Then you have all these older people who've been on this terrible processed food diet to no fault of their own for the past 40 years. And now they have to be on all these medications. They have to go to the doctor's office, and it's creating such a higher expense in our healthcare system. So again, but then to address that and talk about health, and now you're getting into the weeds on that where people get upset. And, so we're just going through we see, not to laugh at it, but you got to laugh to keep from crying. We see a big problem coming in so many fields, and we're going to be forced to make a change. Can we be proactive and prevent it? Or are we going to continue like the older generations who didn't have the ability to communicate on the masses and wait till, stuff hits the fan? So we'll have to wait and see, man. But but yeah, to answer your original question, I'm at the current moment, I do not see the national debt slowing down or turning around with the current information that we have at hand.
I agree. And something that we talk a lot about boomers and we talk a lot about millennials and Gen Z, but the generation we often do not discuss is Gen X. That is the generation I'm actually the most concerned about, financially speaking, because they're the generation with the most in debt. They're also the generation that might be thinking about retirement soon, but they're having to support their parents and their kids at the same time. And not to mention, I believe I specifically talk a lot about the labor market. I believe that we're going to see mass layoffs coming in the near future. So I think that the solution actually comes to if we could have millennials and Gen Zs actually be able to talk to Gen X, that's a large enough portion for a large amount of people to be able to start making a difference. Do you think that there is a possibility that we all begin to come together? Or do you think that it's going to just lead into this, the endless thing that we were talking about of burying your head in the sand?
I think we're going to reach a point where we're going to have to come together. I think right now we're still comfortably uncomfortable, but I think when it goes to discomfort and people really can't pay their bills, we're going to be forced to come together. But I think enough of us are still getting by, enough people are still paycheck to paycheck in a little bit of a cushy life, not extravagant, but they're like, I'm not going to ruffle any feathers. I don't really like my job. I could use a raise. But I don't want to be fired. It's kind of all that. But yeah, the Gen Xers are kind of the generation that I feel are just waiting. I don't know why they're not taking charge, but it almost feels like they would just be the big brothers and sisters to the millennials. If we stepped up and said, "Hey, we're going to change things. We're all going to run for office. We're going to get into Congress. We're going to change the way things are." They would support us. They're down. But you're right. It is the most bizarre. They need to be studied, the Gen Xers, because they don't care. Like they care, but I'm saying they are not in the discussion whatsoever. They're just living their lives, not getting involved, and it's pretty phenomenal to watch, really. And I'm an older millennial, kinda, um, but I'm involved in it. Like I'm not a Gen Xer attitude type, but they're fascinating to watch. I'm curious what's going to unfold in the next 5 to 10 years between the generations for sure.
I agree, and something that again, I often reflect on what I saw in people's bank accounts, and to see this. Overall, boomers were quite nice. They tried to share their wisdom. Gen X were more just interested in my life, I think, because I was closer to their age of their kids. So they kind of were comparing and things like that. When I started making videos specifically about what is happening now, that is when I saw another side of Gen X and boomers that I didn't know really existed. I had heard about the conflict, but I didn't really believe it to be true. Some of the most horrendous comments I have gotten have been from Gen X and boomers. And I even tried to respond to them and say, hey, I actually did exactly what you did. This is a bit of my background, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll be like, yeah, but you're still lazy. And I think, again, it goes back to, I think they do want to support us. I think we have to break down that barrier of that. It's almost like a fashionable thing to hate the boomers and to then hate the Gen Zers. It just doesn't feel, I can't believe that there is truly that many boomers and Gen Zers that don't care about the country's future and actually hate younger people. That just, again, doesn't make sense to me.
I think it's just the personality traits. I'm stereotyping, but for boomers, the way that I'm trying to understand them is they went through their most adult life, let's even say like 25 to 60, where there wasn't much change. Everything was, here's the blueprint, here's what to do, and just work hard, work overtime, stay out of trouble, and you're going to have a great life. You'll have your 401k, you can buy a house, have a kid. Like, why would you ever talk bad about the country that you worked for and things kind of worked out for you? But nothing changed. So for some reason, they don't like change. They like the exact same thing. And millennials and Gen Zers are the opposite of we are always changing. We are looking for the most convenient, most efficient, the biggest change. We're ready for the adventure. And I think it's just two dynamic personality groups that just are clashing because we represent that change that they don't like. And it's just making them uncomfortable. But we grew up with change. We grew up, especially millennials. You're a little younger from what you said. So I don't know if you probably did. Yeah, you didn't have life before the internet like we did. Like, I'm not that different than Gen X in a lot of ways, but I also understand Gen Zs. That's why millennials are in this interesting group where we know the boomers and the Gen Zers very well because we're a little of both of them. But that's what I think the biggest beef comes from, is they just want to keep everything how it is because it's worked for them, but we're trying to change things so quickly and it's just making them uncomfortable. But yeah, we gotta come together. And you're right though, they do kind of beef with us and kind of talk a little crap. Um, but I don't really indulge in it too much. I've tried to, like, answering some questions in that, but even the comments I get back from my millennial followers, they'll just say you can show them every data point. They're not going to change their mind on it. You can show them all the proof and they'll look, they'll be like, oh no, you can get an apartment for $900. And it's like, well, I mean, you can't. You can get a used car for $800. You really can't. It's like 8,000 to get one that doesn't break down every 2 days. Um, so I think just us continuing to speak up, we can bridge that gap. And lastly, you know, do we need the boomers' support? That's the other thing. I think we needed to educate everyone, because my biggest thing is I didn't want Gen Zers to feel like they're crazy. And I think I should even make more videos about talking about when I graduated high school in 2006, instead of going back to the 80s, where they can go, in 2006, you could get an apartment for $300. You could live on $150 a month for groceries. I want the Gen Zers to know that they're not crazy. This is not normal. When you made 60 grand as a millennial, if you made 60 grand, you were crushing it. I lived off $25,000 for 4 years in Los Angeles, California, one of the most expensive cities, on 25 grand with a roommate. But, and I wasn't like, oh, I can't, decorated the apartment, went to brunch 3 times a week, went out to the bars on $25,000 a year in Los Angeles just 15 years ago.
That is unreal, and it's something my friends and I share your videos a lot amongst each other. So I'm very excited to be able to talk with you. But you have been a voice for us, especially because a lot of us do feel a bit crazy, and I've seen a tremendous amount of people completely check out, just absolutely are not going to participate in anything that's going on with society, and are very negative. And it's really hard because it's like those that can see what's going on. It feels like we're fighting amongst all of us. Something that I'm concerned about is retirement. I'm almost becoming confident that, as you've mentioned many times, Social Security pretty much isn't going to exist for Gen Zers, I don't think. I don't see how Gen X is actually going to be able to retire and do the things that they need to do to check out of the workforce for millennials to then be able to make more money, fill those spots, and to have that natural progression. I think that we're really going to see a society where all of us, if there are jobs available, are going to be probably working for the rest of our life. You talk about this a lot. What are your perspective on what's going to happen with retirement?
Well, one thing to lead into the retirement, but to just back up one step on it, is I think with the Gen Zers and even some millennials are going to have to make a decision of, do we, like I said earlier, migrate to a smaller town, go live a little off grid, learn to be more minimalistic, and just enjoy our time, our freedom to pursue ideas and opportunities, especially with our cell phones these days, but don't burden ourselves in the rat race. Like, kind of, I don't mean go live 2 hours in the woods, but I mean just somewhere else where you can live comfortably, remote work for $50,000 and live that life and just enjoy yourself. Or can you make 150 or more? Or with your spouse, can you make 150 or more? I think anywhere in between is where that depression comes in, because unfortunately, that's where you're the one in the hamster wheel and you feel like you're going crazy. So if you're maybe just in that portion temporarily, but put a plan together to save up enough money and go buy something somewhere, or if you're going to continue to advance, but then if you do make 200 grand, don't go spend 200 grand. Live below, you know what I mean? The boomers are right on that. Live below your means. You don't want to go paycheck to paycheck, because then you're going to lose interest in your job in 7 years and you're going to hate that you got yourself into this mess. But that's another topic. But when it comes to retirement in general, whether our Social Security is available or not, or it turns into some sort of universal basic income in 30 years, whatever it may be, it's not going to be enough to support a generation who has to rent. That's my biggest concern. What you said about Gen X is also true. Gen X might have enough in their 401k to pull out 3 to 5% a year plus their supplemental Social Security because their house will be paid off. Even my parents, they live in Ohio. Their property tax and homeowners insurance a month is only $370. They have their home paid off. Therefore, their retirement off my dad's pension, they're living a great life. But if they didn't have that house and had to come by next to their son, it would cost them $3,400 a month for the same size house. Now they would have no extra spending money and their retirement would be difficult. Even if they rented the house across the street from me at $2,500 for their retirement, would still be losing $2,200 a month of free spending to golf, to go to breakfast and all that stuff. The boomers aren't rich. They might have rich on paper, like 800 grand for their house, but they're probably not using that. That's probably just something to feel good about, but they're living, a little paycheck to paycheck, but they have their house paid off. And this is why I've made a million videos on this, because my only fear is if we get rid of people buying homes, if we all accept that the American dream's over, we'll never buy a home, then that means that we'll be stuck renting forever. So if we're stuck renting forever, what if rent continues to grow like it's been the last 30 years and the average apartment in the average town is $7,000 instead of $2,000? How do we retire with $7,000 for just rent? Who knows what groceries will be? And instead, if we own a house, like my house, when it's paid off, even if it goes up to say $800,000 in 30 years, my property tax and homeowners insurance will only be about $1,200 a month. I can retire more comfortably on $1,200 a month than $7,000 for people who can't buy a house. So that shouldn't scare people, but it should kind of light a fire under you to go, what's going to be your plan? Because just working and relying on Social Security, unfortunately, is not going to be enough. So you have plenty of time. Don't be stressed, but start putting a plan together and thinking about, if I'm not going to buy, am I going to make more money? What am I going to do? But I think it's important for us to have these hard discussions, because the reality is going to hit the younger generation eventually. So that's what I always tell myself. I know some of my videos might not make people feel great, but I'd rather you hear about it now when you have options than it become a hard reality in 10 years where you're like, oh man, I didn't prepare at all. I should have listened. So that's where I kind of hope to give people inspiration of, like, just figure out what you need to do, because retirement is going to be quite interesting for the Gen Xers and especially Millennials and Gen Zers.
And I think that you are giving a lot of inspiration. Like I mentioned, long before I reached out to you, my friends and I have all been sharing your content, and it's helped us a lot. My friend just bought a home, but leading up to that, I mean, it was daily sending videos about what you were updating us on and things of that nature. To conclude this, I'm really curious, what got you started into sharing things like that? I feel like we've discussed with this whole conversation, a lot of us see it, but not many of us are discussing it. I'm curious to kind of hear what led you to that.
It's kind of a loaded one, but I can go a bunch of different directions. It's kind of like a bunch of things came together at once. I've always been interested in numbers. What I'm doing online is what I've been doing my whole life, just privately. And I never thought, like, let me make videos about this. I've just been super fascinated. I also had a very interesting time in my 20s where I made a lot of money. And because I wasn't financially educated, I lost it all and went broke. And I kept thinking to myself, if I would have had me making videos, like whoever my superior would have been at the time or elder, and I would have seen one video that goes, oh, wait a minute, maybe I should look into an investment property or buy a house or save or something, I could have been like, oh, I could have been in such a different position. So selfishly, I try to be that person that I didn't find online because we kind of grew up at a different time. But then once I got into real estate, the whole thing on my content kind of just happened by accident, because I was creating content consistently for 11 years. Like I got on this train 2012 because I was an actor and it was just a way to connect with fans and things like that. But I saw the value of creating a brand, but I was more lifestyle, more just sharing my life. But when I got into real estate to help promote my business, I started talking about real estate and things like that. And then I had one video after talking to a boomer at a barbecue who was telling me that they had high interest rates in the 80s and that it's all relative. And I was looking at the math going, the home was 40,000 then, ours is 400, and our rates aren't that much off. So I go, let me just do the math. Made one video between the 1980s and 2023 at the time, and it just exploded and got like 5 million views. And I go, holy crap. And I was like, well, let me read some of these questions. And then people were asking me questions and I kept responding and responding and responding. And it was basically the community that built my whole platform because I would just go off of their questions. So they would say, well, should I buy a home now or should I rent? And then I'd say, well, and I'd make another video. And then it just has morphed into the boomer millennial, everything that I've been talking about. And I just love it. I genuinely love it. Like I sit here, if I could even show you, this is crazy, dude. Like, I mean, just endless scribbles of just constant ideas of mine that I'm like, oh my God. And then I hear these quotes or I'll hear someone on TV saying, $20 an hour, or this and that. And I'm like, that's not right. And I'm doing the math. I'm like, it's this much a month. So I just love it. I've always loved numbers. And it reminds me of the saying, luck favors the prepared mind. I had a lucky moment that a year and a half ago, I felt like I'm probably one of a handful. If that's not, I'm trying to be humble here, but I feel like maybe a year and a half ago, I was probably one of the first ones to start talking about the disparities of the 80s to today and kind of got that convo going. And they started having on the news and had me on a bunch of times, which is super cool. But I had been creating content for 11 years. So I was ready for the opportunity when it hit and then just started rolling with it. And I love that my content now is actually helpful. Because though lifestyle's fun, it's more entertainment. I love that I can actually impact someone's lives in a real way. And so it's just come full circle to me. So it's kind of just getting started. I have a lot of opportunities on the table right now that I'm trying to sort through and see where to take this next. But having a blast, man. I love it. And I'm learning myself too. It's making me more competent as an agent. It's making me more competent as a creator, just knowing all these statistics, and it's helping me apply it to my own life too.
Incredible. Well, Freddie, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on and providing so much value.
Awesome, man. It's a pleasure meeting you. And let's talk again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.